All right, everyone. So apologies for not getting this recorded and up sooner than just right now. But this is the lecture that we missed last week, and we are going into a new unit today. So you guys should definitely be taking notes on this, make a new section, continue taking notes how you were as a group. If you have any issues with the unit or anything like that, this chapter, this is going to be a pretty short lecture on just really the first half. I'm going to leave it up to you guys to work on the second half on your own. So anyway, we're going to a new unit today. Well, really last week, but we're not going to talk about that again. When we began this course, we started with the dawn of life. We started with the Big Bang and traveled swiftly through the prehistoric age and into the Neolithic with the beginnings of the agrarian societies or farming societies. These agrarian societies eventually grew into kingdoms, and now we are following them into the age of empire. Now, this period of our studies will focus on the years 600 BCE to 600 CE. So we're crossing over that kind of 1-to-1 year range, okay? So really pay attention to when I say BCE or CE because I don't want you guys to get too confused, all right? Now, this means we're crossing into a period with a richer source base, and thus we're going to be able to look more closely at the peoples we discuss, and we're going to be able to study them with more detail. Now, this unit is going to be 4 chapters long, and as always, I encourage you to read along in the book. This lecture covers much of the chapter, but there are items discussed in both that are not seen in the other. Specifically, the last couple of kingdoms discussed in the Americas, I'm not going to cover them because I wanted to focus more on Africa, and also you guys can read. So anyway, back to the unit. There are 4 questions on page 149 in your text, which will guide us as we continue. Now, they are, number 1, what is the connection between food, population density, and patterns of social political formation in world history? Why did these patterns develop later in sub-Saharan Africa and the Americas? 2, what elements did the visionaries of circa 700 to 500 BCE share in common, and what made their visions so decisive in the course of world history? 3, which areas in the Americas saw the development of a corn and potato-based agriculture that did not depend on the plow, the wheel, and iron making? So with this question, hint, the Americas, they didn't have horses, right? So they didn't need the wheel. So think about stuff like that when you're answering the question that talks about this. And 4, the last one, what is the difference between kingdoms and empires, and how did empires change as a result of the adoption of state religions? So we're going to see a little bit of that today with the kingdom of Aksum, but we're going to see more of that as time goes on. So if at the end of this unit you can answer those 4 questions, you'll be in pretty good shape for both comprehension of world civilizations and what you're more interested in, passing your exam. So, excuse me. Now, today's topic, and I'm going to share my screen in a second. Today's topic is the chiefdoms and early states in Africa and the Americas. We're not talking about the Americas. You guys are going to read about it. And I will definitely be pulling questions from that part. I've made a note in my notes to make sure that I pull a couple of questions from that. If we do a study guide, big if, those items will be featured on there, and you'll know pretty much what I pull from there, okay? It's not going to be a big surprise. Anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Give me a second. Here we go. Oh, actually, yes, share. Okay. So, oh, we don't want it like that. Let's see. There we go. All right, chiefdoms and early states in Africa and the Americas. So here's Africa on the right. Little geography for you. You should be pretty familiar with how to read a map by now. See me if you need help with that. But today, over 680 million people live in Africa. Many areas are densely populated, while others, like the Saharan, the desert here, kind of right in the middle, okay, big letters, Sahara, are sparsely inhabited for obvious reasons, okay? Nigeria, for example, holds 1/5 of the population on the continent, just because it is in a more temperate zone, which means that it's not quite so hot and there's shade, unlike in the desert where there isn't any. Um, However, the majority of Africans live in more rural areas where their lifestyle centers more on agricultural activities. Okay, we have seen how ancient peoples develop early cities, trading networks, and spiritual beliefs. And we're going back to Africa today to study the early African kingdoms. Okay, we're studying two kingdoms. So once we cover those, we'll be pretty much done. I do have a video for you guys, and I'm going to put it in, I'm going to share it on my screen, and then I'll put the link for you to get a little bit more information. But so the climate of Africa. In the parts of Africa which are not heavily populated, Africa's geography and climate have had an enormous impact on the development of culture, okay, for pretty obvious reasons, as you'll see. There is an alteration between rainy and dry seasons, and that's seen pretty much all throughout the world, but a lot really in Africa, but in different areas to varying degrees. Africa is a pretty large continent. I hope this isn't coming as a surprise to you, that it's very big. So it also shouldn't come as a surprise to you that there are many different climate zones, okay? So the alteration allows for artisans, so craftsmen, to create goods and for peoples to organize festivals and other social events in those dry seasons. And then the rainy seasons are used for, you guessed it, farming. So certain regions, southwestern Africa and parts of eastern Africa's interior, also had and have had frequent droughts, okay? Now these droughts last a very, very long time. It's not just a year, it's more like 20 to 40 years, okay? So with a drought lasting that long, you can just imagine the amount of impact that has on the people living there. They have to change what they're doing because the climate has changed around them, okay? So these droughts force populations to migrate often or adopt a permanent nomadic lifestyle, okay? Nomadic, moving, following your food source, okay? As a result, these peoples who are more nomadic rely on body ornamentation rather than permanent structures or idols like we see in Egypt. So go ahead and pause here if you need any more of this information, but I want to show you a good map to use for understanding world civilizations, but specifically the time period that we're about to get into. I couldn't find really good maps for the kingdoms we're studying, so I found an interactive map that you may find helpful. So we're gonna go there now. If I can find it, here we go. All right. Here we are. So here is our interactive map. Okay, shouldn't zoom out, Africa, okay? And this map has some pretty helpful little hints for you when we're looking. So we've looked over here before. I've got it set to 1300 BCE because that is kind of a good place for you to see. Here's the New Kingdom of Egypt, talking about migration, the Hittites that we didn't really cover. Now, this map is primarily, well, it's most useful for the Mediterranean regions. Think Rome, and then we've got some Egyptian going on. But what we're going to do is we're going to fast forward a little bit, right? Let's see, to 1250. You can see how things change. Let's go to 1000. All right, we're going to back it up, hit go, and you can see that the new kingdom of Egypt has declined. And instead, we've got the kingdom of Kush here. And to bring us up to what we're studying today, here we are. So Meroë is right here, and this is the kingdom of Meroë. This is what we're starting with, which it is or was a metropolis center for the kingdom of Kush, but developed into its own, okay? I've got a map of trading routes for you, but as you can see, it is on the Nile here, which has connection to the Mediterranean, pretty close here to the coast, and then to other peoples down here, okay? So it's pretty well protected, and it's pretty well situated for trade and other things. So you can see how things change if you just fast forward. The Romans popped up out of nowhere here. These cities, they're all defined for you. So, and then you can click them and it'll take you to an info page. I really recommend playing around on this site because it's a pretty good resource. You can just hit forward. It's going to bring you to the big empires. Here we are. And then, of course, you can zoom out. Here's Mediterranean here, and we're still down here with Meroë. Okay, so this may seem a little redundant to you, but we're going to be talking about Meroë, and then we're going to be talking about the Aksum kingdom, which is here. Okay, so we're pretty much focusing right here on the that would be the east coast. Whew, this break didn't do me a favor. It's the east coast of Africa. Here's the Horn of Africa. That's going to be a big geographical feature. You can see that being on your test. But let's go ahead and fast forward to 300 CE so you can see a big change. And there we go. So here's Aksum right here. Now, in your book, it's referred to as AKSUM, so that's how we're going to do it, but it's also referred to as AXUM, okay? And then here we are. Give it a second to load, of course. Ignore the fundraiser, but you've got a nice little article on the Kingdom of Meroë, okay? So that's just a little resource for you guys to use as you need. But let's go back to the PowerPoint. All right. So Kingdom of Meroë. Okay, I did have a map. Here it is, right here. All right. And I'm not really gonna be pausing a lot because you guys are smart. You can pause the video for yourselves. So if you need to. All right. So archaeology has revealed that Africans shifted from foraging to agriculture in the Sudan, right? This is where we are, Sudan, right here, okay? Earlier than in any other African culture. So this puts them kind of on the forefront of African cultural development. Now these sites showed they raised cattle, grew sorghum, which is just a cereal crop, like a grain, and made pottery. Those are their similarities to each other. So let's get to the Kingdom of Meroë. Again, follow along in your book or read up on it, okay? So these people survived by planting sorghum and millet, African cereal crops, and barley and wheat. That's the first bullet. Archaeologists argue that this kingdom predominantly supported itself through the trade of agriculture as it existed along several trade routes, as previously mentioned. So the city itself occupied 1 square mile of extremely fertile ground. At its peak, the city had 20,000 inhabitants and was surrounded by even more peoples living in towns surrounding it. Now, the city itself, the royalty lived in great palaces, while the working class lived in small houses of mud brick or huts. Pretty usual stuff, okay? The chiefs of the towns surrounding Meroë, right? So you got the big city, kind of capital, think of it that way, and then you've got towns surrounding it, kind of like a city-state, but not totally the same. Now, the chiefs of these towns operated semi-independently of the king and likely worked with him more as partners and not in a feudal sense. The king had more control over trade and thus had more power than any of his partner chiefs. Okay. Now, the miners produced iron in the north and farmers produced cotton in the south. All right. Now, north of Meroë, you've got the miners with the iron, and then the farmers in the south with the cotton. Now, all of this was brought to Meroë, where all of that would be brought to, and they would use it to craft goods. Smiths and weavers in the city produced weapons, hoes, utensils, and cloth for consumption and trade. Hunters in the towns would hunt for elephants for ivory and ostriches for their feathers. These goods would then be traded to other kingdoms over land um, for money, goods, etc. All right, general trade. Now, this kingdom also practiced a great deal of metallurgy and was the first African kingdom to do so. This is probably where you should pause the video and go Control F your notes and find the definition of metallurgy. Okay. Their iron industry made the city both famous and wealthy. All right. The iron weapons and tools that they made were incredibly well sought after. Okay. So in China, we talked about how they were using bronze weapons against people who were using bone weapons. Obviously, bronze is going to work better than the bone weapons are. Same thing here. Iron is going to work better than bronze weapons, and obviously, wooden weapons and bone weapons. Okay, and their art and monuments had a unique style and seems to be a mix of different influences. You got some Egyptian influences and then influences from the region in which they lived. Um, their pyramids look very different from their close Egyptian counterparts, some of them having flat tops and most having very steep angled sides. And much of the script of the Meroë is indecipherable. Much of their writing is indecipherable because they kind of took Egyptian hieroglyphs and then changed it, and it evolved over time. So we're not really sure how it evolved. So there we are. But I've got a couple of pictures in here. Okay, so here is one of our pyramids. You can see that it is much smaller. All right, some in the back obviously having crumbled, but having flat tops. Okay, here's just one example. Let's see what I have next. Oh, here's some iron weapons made by the people of Meroë. All right, obviously don't look very sharp today, but age will do that to anyone. All right, let's see. So, and I'll go back to those in a second. Lastly, the decline of the Meroë. There are three factors which led to the decline and collapse of the kingdom. Now, their iron industry made them very wealthy and very famous among their counterparts. How you make iron, how the Africans made iron and the smelting process is pretty similar to today. What you need is charcoal, all right? Meroë is surrounded by hardwood forests at the time, okay? And you need this hardwood because you need to burn it underground, say in a mound, right? A very contained burn to create charcoal. This charcoal is then used to smelt with the iron ore to make iron, okay? Now don't take all that information to Mr. Moran because I'm sure the chemistry that I just described is a little off, but that's the basic idea, all right? So the iron industry ate up the entire hardwood forest as smiths needed that charcoal in order to smelt it. As peoples from all over the Mediterranean and Africa wanted those iron tools and weapons, they used all their available resources around Meroë. Basically, they used up all the wood. They didn't have any more. They couldn't make their iron tools. So the second reason, camel nomads began raiding their northern regions where the miners were after they were kind of in decline. Okay. And then third, Ethiopian tribes took over the weaker towns closer to the border and later the kingdom's role in the region. So now those Ethiopian tribes are the ancient Aksum. Okay, so that is the next kingdom we're going to discuss. But again, here is our pyramid example. You can see how it was influenced by the Egyptians. Now these peoples are, we all come from the same place. We took a long time in class discussing that. But here especially, you can see that we all kind of exchange ideas and exchange our culture when we're in any sort of contact with each other, okay? And then our iron weapons, of course. All right, the Kingdom of Aksum here. And this is a good map for you to understand the trade routes, okay? Here we go, Meroë on the trade routes here. The Aksum, they have more access to the Red Sea, Indian Ocean, and so on. especially to the Arabian Peninsula, but I digress. You guys can read a map, I hope. All right. Let's see. So, Aksum is the name of a city and kingdom, which is modern day northern Ethiopia and Eritrea. Okay. Um, Here you go, right there. Ethiopia and Eritrea. And I always say that wrong, so I probably said it the wrong way. But it's located on the northern edge of the highland zone of the Red Sea coast, right here, right? Highland edge. Here you can see the elevation change. And then the Horn of Africa. So it's north of the Horn of Africa on the western coast of the Red Sea here, okay? It was founded about the 1st century CE, not BCE, CE, and survived to the 8th century. Now this is a pretty long time. We've seen longer kingdoms, but this one will remain kind of in existence. It's not going to be peak existence, but it's going to remain in existence for longer than that. So now the civilization and empire had an enormous amount of influence in Egypt and Rome, okay? In your book, it discusses that a little bit, and we're going to see that a little bit more this week when we discuss Greece and Rome and Persia. Right? Now, it prospered thanks to agriculture, cattle herding, and control over trade routes, which saw gold and ivory exchanged for foreign luxury goods. Gold and ivory were their main exports, but they also exported salt, slaves, tortoise shell, incense, rhino horns, obsidian, and emeralds. In return, they bought Indian and Egyptian textiles, cotton cloth, swords and other weapons, iron, glass beads, bronze lamps, glassware, wine, and olive oil. Now, the wine and olive oil come from Greece, which means that they were trading a tremendous distance for all of their goods, making lots of money. The kingdom did have their own writing system. The earliest found examples are found on sheets of rock slabs, which date to the 2nd century CE. They also had their own currency. Let's see. Here's an example. Ooh, the image is pretty blurry. But here's an example of their currency. Their coins were made of gold, silver, and bronze, and have Greek inscriptions with the figures of their king pressed into them. There's something like 24 kings, or 25, I think it's 24. I want to say it's 24 kings depicted on coins that we found thus far. You can see that he's framed by 2 wheat stalks. This means that agriculture is very important. It also has some symbolic meaning also. Now, their coins were minted according to the Roman weighting system. This means that they were trading extensively with the Romans, and they were very well off and had a lot of influence, okay? The phrases which appear on the coins on the outside, now you can't read this because I can't read it either, so I'm assuming maybe you can. I don't know. They include peace to the people, and another one is health and happiness to the people. Initially, let's back it up. Initially, these people practiced a polytheistic religion, which included Marem, the god of war, upheaval, and the monarchy. They also worshiped the moon deity Habas and Astor, the god of Venus. Now, the Aksum made sacrifices to these gods and to their ancestors, but in the 4th century CE, the Aksum embraced the Orthodox tradition of Christianity under the rule of King Ezana. Okay, under the rule of King Ezana. So this is the first African state to become Christian. Now there is a whole story behind it. If you're interested in that story, I do encourage you to look it up. It's pretty interesting, and I think that you'll enjoy the story. Does have a little bit of myth woven in there, as all good stories do. Now, in the world of art, they produced red and black terracotta wares, pottery. They are a simple construction simply because they didn't use a wheel to produce them. They were just molded by hand. And the most common motif on them, the most common decoration, is the Christian cross. Now, there have been no large-scale cultural projects found, but there are the bases for sculptures, and they also have, I'm forgetting the name, but they also have monuments styles, which are found all over the world. Actually, we have one in Washington, D.C. Think, I want to see if anyone can guess um, what that is. I hope you can. But um, one example has indentations for feet carved into it, and the inscription describes some divine figure, which means that there was a base for a statue, and the statue was either never placed or more likely it was destroyed by people who took over the kingdom after them. There are small figures that exist, but no tombs, which could tell us about the people. Well, there are tombs, but they were plundered by grave robbers for the treasure. So historians and archaeologists don't know as much about them as we perhaps do about the Egyptians. Now, it declined due to increased competition from Muslim Arab traders here on the Arabian Peninsula. You can see it here in Mecca, okay, and Jerusalem right here, okay, um, and the rise of rival local peoples around the kingdom. It survived as a much smaller remnant, which would later become part of the kingdom of Abyssinia. All right, now let's look at some pictures. Here we go. I want anyone to guess, perhaps in a comment on this video, what they think the equivalent is of this obelisk. That was the term I was looking for, obelisk. Here in the United States, there are all over the world, but here's one example. Here is the Aksum Venus. So the Venus figure, you guys should, I hope, know what she represents. Here it could also be Aster, a depiction of Aster, the god of Venus. So keep that in mind. Also, you can see that this depiction of the woman is more modern than our previous Venuses, specifically the Venus of Willendorf. You know, it might help in your notes to compare them. That could be a good test question. And then here is an Aksum Christian church, actually. They are built into the ground. I do encourage you to look it up. It's quite interesting. Their brand of Christianity is slightly different than the one that you're probably more familiar with, but their churches are very beautiful, carved into the earth. So it makes them kind of a hidden treasure, if you will. Here's our currency. And then here is some artwork, some Christian artwork from the Aksum Empire or Aksum Kingdom. There you can see Mary with Jesus. And then you've got some disciples there on the right. But I think this is a good image for you to see because culturally, Aksum and the bed of Christianity are very different. However, the images are pretty similar. So you can see how different cultures communicate their beliefs and identities with one another and kind of transfer that to other peoples. I think I've got one more picture. Nope, I don't have one more picture. So now there are more civilizations discussed in the book, including the kingdom of Teotihuacan. I always have to pause before I say that, which you absolutely need to have some familiarity with. This lecture is rather short because I know that your attention span for history is also very short. So now we are going to watch a short video on the Kingdom of Aksum because it is such a rich culture, I really can't do it justice. So we're going to watch that video here at the end. Let's say the first 2 people that comment and for the first person that watches this and comments the correct answer to my question that I posed a few minutes ago gets a bonus point on their test, okay? Let's see. We are going to, oh goodness, give me a second, guys. There we go. Sharing this.
the Covenant, Aksum. The ancient city of Aksum in Ethiopia thrived as a capital of the first Ethiopian kingdom, founded at the end of the 1st century. Aksum is also a Christian holy site. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church continues to follow early Christian teachings, practices and traditions. These 20-meter-high stone monuments, standing in the center of the town, are the tombstones of ancient kings. People here practiced an ancient religion before Christianity was introduced. This half-moon shape represents the god of the moon. Christianity was introduced to Aksum during the 4th century. The Church of Saint Meroë of Zion was built at around that time. The legend on how Aksum became a sacred site is depicted here. During the 9th century, the Queen of Sheba, who dominated this region, fell in love with King Solomon of Israel and had a son named Menelik I. Menelik I became the first king of Ethiopia. He acquired the ark containing the tablets of the 10 Commandments and brought it to Aksum. The Ark of the Covenant was then brought to this church. The entrance to the sacred room where the ark is kept is protected by 2 angels holding swords. The sacred ark can only be seen by the public on the day of a festival. However, no one has ever actually seen what is inside, as it is prohibited to open the ark. This festival is carried out to celebrate the day when Jesus Christ was baptized. The climax of the festival is a large-scale baptism ceremony attended by the local Christians. This pond is believed to be the place where the Queen of Sheba herself used to bathe. At the end of the festival, many people jump into the pond and swim. It is certainly the highlight of the year for the citizens of Aksum.
All right, so again, if you take me up on your offer, make a comment, just in case anyone rewinds to the end of the video. Earlier, I discussed a bonus point opportunity, so if you missed that, you might want to start the video over and watch the whole thing, take some notes. Don't just rely on your neighbors. You don't know how good they are at taking notes. So if you have any questions, please reach out. Again, this is just the African section, so you will still need to study the Mesoamerica section. Any questions, remind or email. Don't Canvas message me because I'll respond a week late. So anyway, I hope you guys have a good last 2 days of your break, and yeah, get with me if you have any questions.